I wasn't the loud kid at the table. Never needed to be. I had to see, and it spoke to me in ways no one else did. While my cousins played soccer or talked about becoming CEOs, I was studying tide charts and learning how to tie a ball line with my eyes closed. Boats weren't just wood and rope to me. They were freedom. Floating proof that you could leave and not look back. Most mornings, before the world woke up, I'd sneak down to the docks just to breathe in that salty air and imagine the life I swore I'd build. At home, it was different. My dreams never made it past the front door. My family, all buttoned up and booming voices, they saw the ocean as a vacation, not a vocation. The minute I said I wanted to start a fishing business, they laughed like I'd told a joke. "You're dreaming too small," they said. "Real men build empires, not catch fish." The words stung, but I learned to wear them like armor. I wasn't chasing their approval. I was chasing something they couldn't even see. They pushed me toward law school, medicine, something respectable, they called it, but none of it felt like mine. I couldn't stomach the idea of trading tides for textbooks or spending a lifetime doing something that made my soul itch. The more they insisted, the clearer it became. I was never going to fit the mold they'd carved. I stopped trying. That's when they gave me a new title, the disappointment. Not in anger, just matter of fact, like it was the truth everyone quietly agreed on. But here's the part they never understood. It was never about the fish. It was never just about boats or gear or pulling nets at dawn. It was about the freedom of carving your own path, even if no one claps for you when you start walking. And I remember thinking, as a kid standing barefoot on a slick dock, wind whipping my face, one day, they'll realize I was never chasing fish. I was chasing freedom. I started to drift away from them without even meaning to. Not physically, not yet, but in all the ways that mattered. At dinners, I'd tune out their business talk and start sketching boat designs in the margins of napkins. I'd pretend to listen while secretly jotting down coastal routes I'd memorized from old maps. Every time they teased me for it, I smiled and nodded. But inside, I was building something brick by invisible brick. I stopped waiting for permission. I stopped explaining myself. They didn't notice at first. Or maybe they did, but they thought I'd grow out of it. Like this was just a phase, a temporary obsession I'd eventually trade for a tie and a title. But the older I got, the deeper the pull became. I started spending more time down at the marina than I did at home. I'd talk to the old fishermen who smelled like salt and smoke, and they talked to me like I mattered. They shared stories, tips, regrets. I listened like their words were gold, because to me, they were. Sometimes, I'd sit on the edge of the dock, feet dangling above the water, and imagine the kind of life I wanted. Quiet, honest, self-made. I didn't need to be famous. I just wanted to belong to something real. My dreams didn't glitter, but they had weight. They held me upright when everything else made me feel small. And every time my father said, "You're wasting your potential," I'd think, no, I'm finally becoming who I am. The funny thing is, disappointment has a way of turning into drive. The more they doubted me, the more determined I became. I wasn't running away from them. I was running towards something they couldn't understand. Something salt-stained and sunlit. I didn't know how or when, but I knew one day I'd prove that chasing the sea was never about escaping. It was about returning to myself, to purpose, to freedom. There were moments I'd try to share my vision, not just the fishing, but the why behind it. Sustainable methods, fair wages, ocean conservation. I'd light up talking about using sonar tracking to avoid overfishing, or how cold chain logistics could revolutionize seafood delivery. But to them, it was all noise. "No one makes money playing fisherman," my uncle scoffed once. "Why settle for scraps when you could run a boardroom?" They didn't see the difference between scraping by and building something sacred. So, I stopped explaining. I let the silence between us grow. If they weren't going to see me, then they didn't get to shape me. It hurt. Of course it did. There's a special kind of pain in knowing your own family sees your passion as a punchline. But that pain? It hardened into clarity. I wasn't going to beg to be understood. I just become undeniable. Let the work speak. Let the sea speak. Let my life speak. And still, I held on to hope. Not that they'd apologize, but that one day they'd understand. That maybe, just maybe, they'd look back and realize I wasn't rebelling. I was reaching. Reaching for something honest, something beautiful, something mine. That every early morning on the dock, every book I read about fishery law, every sketch I made of a boat that didn't exist yet, it all meant something. I wasn't chasing fish. I was chasing freedom. And deep down, even then, I knew, when I finally caught it, it wouldn't be just for me. Leaving home didn't feel brave. It felt like tearing off a part of myself with no promise it'd ever grow back. I packed a duffel, kissed my mom on the cheek. She didn't kiss me back, and walked out the front door while everyone was still asleep. No dramatic farewell. Just the quiet click of the door and the sting of a decision I couldn't unmake. I had no plan, just a name I believed in and a gut full of stubborn hope. The ocean was waiting. That was enough. I slept in borrowed corners, an old fisherman's shed, the back of a bait shop, once even under an overturned canoe when it rained. I took any job I could get, scrubbing hulls, unloading crates, hauling nets twice my weight. It was hard, filthy, aching work, and I loved it. Because every blister, every bruise, every paycheck was mine. Not given, earned. And at night, when the world quieted, I'd study. Pages of fishing law, charts, tech manuals, whatever I could get my hands on. I still heard from my family. Not often and never kindly. They'd send group texts with photos of their polished lives. New houses, promotions, tropical vacations. Once, my cousin replied to a photo I posted from a dock saying, "Didn't know cavemen had Instagram." I didn't respond. Not because it didn't hurt, but because I was too tired to waste energy on people who'd already decided I was a punchline. I didn't need their approval. I just needed one chance to prove them wrong. I saved like every dollar was a lifeline. Because it was. I skipped meals to stash more away. No one saw it, the hunger, the cold, the bone-deep loneliness, but I kept going. Not because I was fearless, but because going back felt worse than any storm I could face out there. I wasn't chasing some childish fantasy anymore. I was building something, inch by inch, from salt, sweat, and silence. The day I bought my first boat, it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like a gamble, and the odds weren't in my favor. It was rusted, moody, leaked at the seams, and had a motor that coughed more than it roared. But she floated, and that was enough. I named her Second Wind. Not because I felt strong, but because I hoped to be. I signed the loan papers with a shaking hand and a half smile, the kind you wear when you're trying to fake faith in yourself. I started small, just me and the boat, hauling crab pots before dawn, dodging storms like they had it out for me personally. I'd lose entire catches some days, tangled nets, broken gear, bills piling up faster than the fish. But I refused to quit. Not once, because every time I thought about walking away, I'd remember the look in my father's eyes the day I left. Not anger, not sadness. Just that cold certainty that I'd fail. I couldn't give him the satisfaction. It was lonely. God, it was lonely. There were nights I'd pull back into harbor, soaked and exhausted, and there'd be no one waiting. No warm dinner. No voice saying, "You did good." Just the creak of the dock and the ache in my shoulders. But I started to find peace in the solitude. The sea didn't judge me. It didn't care who I disappointed or what I looked like on paper. It just asked for grit, and I gave it all I had. The first time I signed a real deal, a small contract with a local bistro that promised to pay for ethically sourced scallops, I cried. Not the triumphant kind of cry, but the quiet, shaky kind that happens when survival starts to feel like success. It wasn't much money, but it was proof. Proof that what I was doing mattered, that maybe I wasn't just surviving anymore. Maybe I was starting to build. The years blurred, dock to dock, catch to catch, setback to breakthrough. I learned everything by doing, failing, repeating. I kept refining my techniques, improving my equipment, building relationships with chefs who wanted better sourcing. I even started tinkering with cold chain tech to keep the fish fresher longer. No investors, no backers, no family cheering me on. Just me and the sea, figuring it out in real time. And slowly, the tide began to turn. I upgraded the boat. Hired one deckhand, then two. Built a tiny office that smelled like ambition and old coffee. Word spread about my methods, the way I respected the ocean, how I refused to overfish, how I paid my crew fairly. The same people who once smirked at my dock job now nodded with a strange respect when they passed me on the pier. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. Every morning I stepped on that boat, I knew who I was. My family? They kept their distance, at least until the money started showing up. Whispers started coming in from old contacts. Your mom mentioned you've done well. Your cousin saw your name in a food magazine. They'd call now and then just to poke around the edges of my life, never admitting they were wrong, just sniffing for proof that maybe, just maybe, they missed something big. And then came the moment. I stepped off a custom-built vessel, silver letters gleaming across the side. Ciron Enterprises. I ran my hand over the name like it was a scar turned into a medal. I wasn't just afloat, I was thriving. But deep down, I knew this wasn't the finish line. This was just the swell before the next storm. And I had a feeling that storm was going to bring them back to shore. Success didn't arrive with a bang. It crept in quietly, like the tide at dusk. Steady, certain, impossible to ignore. One day, I was patching nets by hand, and the next I was consulting with engineers on sustainable fishing drones. I had a fleet, a staff, a boardroom. My name, once a joke whispered at family parties, was now printed on contracts. Vessels and seafood packaging from coast to coast. Ciron wasn't just a business. It was a movement. And I built every inch of it from the silence they left me in. Funny how people treat you when they think you have nothing. Funnier still when they realize you have everything. My phone started lighting up with familiar names. Cousins I hadn't heard from in a decade suddenly just wanted to catch up. Aunts who once said, "Fishing's no job for a grown man," now gushed over my success like it had always been inevitable. They thought I'd be flattered. But all I felt was this low, humming ache, like grief dressed up as irony. I watched from a distance as the family empire, the one they were so proud of, crumbled like a sandcastle at high tide. Poor decisions. Risky investments. Loans they shouldn't have taken. One by one, their shiny facades started to crack. Some lost their homes. Others sold off cars, jewelry, pride. They tried to keep it quiet, but word has a way of traveling when you're the one they used to look down on. The same mouths that once spit out disappointment were now learning how to say, please. When the first real ask came, it was almost impressive in its performance. My brother, slick, charming, always the golden one, sent a voice note pretending like we were close, said he missed me, asked if we could meet for dinner, just the family. I listened to it twice, then once more with the volume off. I didn't reply right away. Instead, I picked up the phone and made a reservation at a private restaurant I owned down on the coast. No fanfare, just my name on the books. I figured if they were hungry for success, They should learn what it tasted like. I showed up early that evening, just to watch the staff prep the room. It wasn't a flashy place. No chandeliers, no velvet ropes. Just glass walls that opened to the sea, fresh catch on the menu, and an air of quiet confidence. Every detail had my fingerprints on it, down to the candlelight that flickered like a heartbeat against the windows. This wasn't a celebration. It was a reckoning wrapped in linen napkins. And for once, I wasn't the one hoping to be seen. They arrived in waves, dressed just well enough to hide the desperation. Fake smiles, tight hugs, compliments that clinked like cheap glass. "You look amazing, Ron. We're so proud of you." I nodded, took their coats, even poured their wine. Let them pretend this was a family gathering. But every time they spoke, I saw the same thing in their eyes: need. That familiar hunger they once said I'd never feed. One by one, the asks came. My cousin needed a small loan to restart his business. My uncle thought I might want to diversify my portfolio and invest in his failing firm. My sister wanted me to sponsor her son's education. The same sister who once said I smelled like dead fish. I listened. I didn't interrupt. I let them pour it all out like they were finally draining years of condescension into apology. Only there was no apology, just entitlement dressed up as flattery. And still, I sat there, calm, present, not because I'd forgiven them, but because I wanted them to see who they were talking to. The boy they tossed aside had become the man holding the net, and I wasn't casting it blindly anymore. They had no idea the trap had already closed. Not out of cruelty, out of truth. I wasn't there to feed them. I was there to feed something in me that had waited a very long time. I could have ended the night there, let them believe their charm still worked, let them leave with hopeful smiles and empty hands. But something in me said, no, not yet. Not before they understood what it cost to get here. So I asked for one last toast. They raised their glasses, clinking with forced cheer, and I looked around the table at the people who once told me I was a waste of a good mind. And I smiled, not with malice, but with clarity. They still didn't see it. I wasn't the one who'd changed. I just stopped pretending. What they thought was a family dinner was something else entirely. A silent reminder. This wasn't their restaurant. Their rules. Their world. This was mine. Every chair, every plate, every bite they took. It existed because I built it. Without their help, in spite of their scorn. And as they passed dishes and made small talk about the old days, I caught myself watching them like strangers, like characters in someone else's story. Because mine had already rewritten itself without them. When dessert came, I didn't eat. I just reached down, opened the folder I'd placed beside me, and laid it on the table like an anchor. Inside were memories they'd tried to erase, printed screenshots of text messages, emails, handwritten notes, the jokes, the jabs, the gut punches they called tough love. They looked down at their own words like they were staring into a mirror for the first time. The silence that followed was heavier than any storm I'd weathered at sea. And in that moment, that thick, uneasy pause, I saw it. The flicker of recognition, the shame, the realization that I'd been paying attention all along. But I didn't gloat. I didn't raise my voice. I simply sat back, folded my hands, and waited. Because the tide had turned, and for once, they weren't the ones doing the casting. They squirmed, but no one spoke. Just eyes bouncing from page to page, mouths half open, hands frozen mid-reach for wine glasses they suddenly forgot how to hold. I could hear the air shift, a hush that wasn't silence, but shame settling in. My brother was the first to clear his throat, trying to force a smile that didn't fit anymore. Come on, Ron. This was all so long ago. We were just joking. You know how families are. I didn't flinch. I didn't blink. because I did know how families were, and mine had taught me everything I needed to survive them. They tried to laugh it off at first. "Tough love," my aunt said. "We just wanted you to aim higher." My cousin added, "Honestly, we thought we were helping. Look at you now," as if their cruelty had been some sort of motivational speech. As if being mocked, dismissed, and shut out was the same as mentorship. I listened to them rewrite history like it was a bedtime story, soft edges and safe endings. But I remembered. I remembered everything, and I brought the receipts. I let the folder sit in the center of the table like a centerpiece no one wanted. The flickering candlelight made the papers look almost wholly sacred relics of the truth they'd tried to bury. I didn't shout, didn't accuse. I just sat in the discomfort with them, let them marinate in their own words. I wanted them to feel what I had felt for years, dismissed, misunderstood, unwelcome at their table. But the difference now was, this was my table. And they didn't know the cost of admission. Eventually, my sister, always the one who needed to be the hero, leaned in, voice sweet and shaky. "We're proud of you now, Ron. Can't we just move forward?" I met her eyes, not with anger, but with something quieter, something heavier. "You taught me how to survive shame," I said. "Let me return the lesson." And before anyone could speak, I stood and turned toward the staff waiting by the door. It was time. Not for dessert, but for something far less sweet. The servers entered like a tide rolling in, quiet, coordinated, certain. Each carried a sleek black gift bag, tied with a navy blue ribbon, one for each family member. No names on the outside, but they knew which one was theirs. I'd made sure of it. They stared, confused at first. Maybe they thought this was a thank you gesture, a peace offering. Something generous from the golden child who finally made it big. But I wasn't here to soothe their guilt. I was here to hand it back to them. One by one, they opened their bags. Inside, not cash, not checks, not keys to a house or shares in the company they never helped build. Just a letter. Each one written by me by hand over the course of months. Tailored to the person, the offense, the silence, the moment they chose not to stand by me. I didn't dramatize. I didn't embellish. I told the truth, word for word. And as they read, their postures shifted, the confidence slouch stiffening, the arms folding tight across chests, the jaws setting in defense or shame. I watched as years of buried moments clawed their way back up. My uncle blinked rapidly, lips twitching like he wanted to protest but couldn't find the words. My mother, who hadn't said much all evening, just sat there, letter in hand, staring like the page had turned to smoke. And for the first time in my life, no one talked over me. No one dismissed me. No one laughed. Because they couldn't argue with what I'd written. It wasn't revenge. It was remembrance. Someone tried to chuckle, awkward, thin. "So this is, what, your way of getting even?" I turned to him slowly. "This is me honoring the truth. You gave me nothing but doubt, and I turned it into direction. You buried me in shame, and I grew roots." This, I gestured to the table, the room, the stunned silence. This isn't payback. It's clarity. And clarity, like the sea, doesn't ask for permission before it rises. No one touched their wine after that. The room, once buzzing with forced laughter and shallow praise, had gone still. The only sound was the soft hum of the ocean outside, waves tapping gently against the shore like a metronome, marking the end of something. I stood tall, not angry, not smug, just steady. I hadn't come to destroy them. I'd come to show them who I became when they weren't looking, when they turned away, when they decided I wasn't enough. I stepped away from the table, slowly, deliberately. My shoes echoed softly on the wood floor as I walked toward the exit. Behind me, they sat frozen, some staring down at the letters, others at their reflections in the polished table surface, like they were trying to see themselves for the first time in years. I didn't turn back. I had no need to see their expressions. I'd lived inside those faces for too long. I knew exactly what they looked like when they were ashamed. At the door, the head of staff waited, eyes trained on me, calm and ready. I gave him a nod, a quiet signal we'd rehearsed in advance, and he moved like clockwork. The team would handle the rest. I wasn't staying for coffee or closure. This wasn't a family reunion. This was a release. The final page of a chapter I'd been trying to close for most of my life, and somehow it felt peaceful, not joyful. But still, like exhaling after holding your breath too long. The last thing I heard before the door shut behind me was the creak of a chair and someone whispering my name, not with anger, not with authority, just soft, uncertain, almost childlike. But I kept walking because the boy they used to mock had become the man they now followed with their eyes. And I wasn't going to let their hunger write the ending to a story they never bothered to read. They didn't know what was coming next. I'd given them the truth, yes, but the lesson wasn't finished. As I walked away from that table, the staff moved with seamless grace. Each family member received one last envelope, slipped into their gift bag like an afterthought. No fanfare, just a final detail, a signature, a seal. Inside wasn't a check or an invitation. It was something far less predictable and far more permanent. They opened them in silence, the room heavy with the scent of ocean air and reckoning. Each letter was personal. I'd rewritten their histories, but this time with clarity and calm. I reminded them, not cruelly, but honestly, of what they'd said when they said it, and what it felt like to be on the receiving end of their scorn. I didn't accuse. I reflected. I told them how I carried their words like weights while I built something no one thought possible. I detailed my journey, not to boast, but to make one thing unmistakably clear. I did it without you. They flipped the page expecting salvation, but what they found instead was a different kind of ending. No inheritance, no partnerships, no jobs, just a lifetime discount card, gold-foiled and non-transferable for meals at any Ciron location. They were welcome, always, as customers, never as partners, never as investors, and certainly not as family in the way they once demanded to be. It wasn't punishment. It was position. I was drawing a line they could see, feel, and carry in their wallets. I imagined them sitting there, holding those cards, realizing they'd misjudged the game. I wasn't the catch they threw back. I was the ocean they thought they'd never have to cross. And now they'd dine at my table, but only from the other side of the glass, not as architects, as guests. And even that was more grace than they ever offered me. I used to imagine revenge would feel loud, like thunder cracking open the sky. But standing there, watching my staff clear the table, I felt something quieter, like still water after a storm. I hadn't screamed. I hadn't shamed. I'd simply shown them who I became when no one believed I could. And maybe that was the real victory. Not the money, not the power, but the calm, the clarity, the ability to walk away without needing to prove a single thing anymore. But it didn't stop there. Because while they were busy looking backward, I had already set my eyes forward. I'd started something in secret, a scholarship fund. Quietly built, carefully managed, and fully anonymous. It was for kids like me, the ones from coastal towns no one invests in. The dreamers who get told their hands are too dirty, their dreams too small, their futures already written. Every scholarship bore the same inscription, in honor of the boy who was told he'd never succeed. No press releases, no ribbon cuttings. Just quiet, powerful change. One life at a time. Because real legacy isn't loud, it ripples. And I wanted those ripples to reach further than my name ever could. I didn't want to just feed people. I wanted to free them from shame, from ceilings, from the kind of family who measures worth by title and suits and empty gestures at hollow dinners. The kind of family I came from and refused to become. I thought of the first time I held a net, how clumsy I was, how cold the rope felt in my hands. Back then, I had no idea what I was catching. I thought it was fish. Later, I thought it was survival. But now, I understood. I'd been casting for something else all along. Dignity, purpose, peace. And somewhere along the way, I caught it. I didn't go back to that restaurant. Not once. Not to see if they used the cards. Not to ask what they thought of the letters. I had no interest in their reactions anymore. I'd already spent a lifetime looking for their approval, mistaking it for love. But now, I knew better. Love doesn't make you shrink. It doesn't mock your calling or rewrite your worth. It stands with you, even when your dreams don't make sense to anyone else. And what they gave me, that wasn't love. It was leverage until I stopped letting them hold it. My life went on. Bigger contracts. New vessels. Partnerships with people who saw the sea the way I did, as something sacred, not something to conquer. I built programs to train young crews, hired single mothers from fishing towns, and turned waste reduction into a cornerstone of the business. Not for PR, not for praise. Just because it felt right. Because this was the empire I had always imagined. Not made of marble, but of meaning. Sometimes I still wake up before dawn, just to walk along the dock and watch the boats rock gently in the dark. The smell of salt, the whisper of rope against wood, it all reminds me where I started, who I was. That quiet boy who dared to dream in a language no one else wanted to hear. He's still here, inside me. And sometimes I wonder if maybe, just maybe, he knew all along how it would end. They threw me back when I was just a catch. Now I own the ocean,